Welcome to my critique of Death of the Outsider, the first in a series of games picked via an arcane and esoteric method with an underlying logic. At least I think there is. Death of the Outsider is the final entry to the Dishonored series, and I thought probably the best place to start a change in approach to this channel, as it neatly ties up what we've done before. But I'll get to that at the end. Let's start by building up an idea of the series as a whole and how it fits together. Death of the Outsider feels like a weird third album from a band who at this stage are very technically adept at what they do. It not only builds and expands on what came before, being inherently in conversation with it, but also improves on several key components. Because a lot of bands are known for doing 3 concept albums with an ongoing narrative. Dishonored is a series that up to this point has been interested in the throne at Dunwall and the Kaldwin line that rules it, along with a conception of honour surrounding its main cast of characters. Each main character has been dishonoured in some respect, and want to revert this if possible. For instance, in the first game we have the main character, Corvo. He is the Royal Protector. This job title gives you the impression that he should be protecting the Royal, but this is a point of frequent failure for him. After failing miserably at this, he goes on a quest of violent or non-violent redemption, taking down a host of conspirators, counter-conspirators, before saving the heir to the throne, thus regaining his honour. That is to say that power politics has been one of the major draws of the series, and it firmly places its conception of honour as a form of failure of your moral duties to another. It is after all a fantastical reconception of Victorian London, a classic honour-based society. It is set in an era of history rife with thematic framing for the game to draw from. Also, as there is a system for moral judgment on the player, the Chaos system, which dishes out a good or bad ending, it cements that the conception of honour has nothing to do with acting morally. You can be an evil bastard and still regain your honour. The keystone that holds together all future stories is the assassination of Empress Kaldwin. After, playing the game, it culminates in Corvo regaining his honour and rescuing the heir to the throne, and his daughter, Emily. But it doesn't end there. Next game, Emily is on the throne and struggling to be the best Empress possible. And then, her long-lost aunt, Delilah Copperspoon, comes to challenge the throne. We can go into more depth later, but this is just a brief overview of the 2 games. Firstly, I'd like to go over some key themes of the world and setting. These are ones that stand out now I'm ruminating on the whole series, but I did not include in any of my previous videos. So, firstly, the series is interested in rapid growth of technology. We have Sokolov, a genius inventor who invents for the sake of invention, and he has rapidly altered the state of the world without any thought of the ethical implications. Walls of Light have destroyed any semblance of freedom of movement, a fact that handily constructs a world perfect for sneaking around. After all, it wouldn't be much of a stealth game without some friction to this. At least a little bit of pushback. It goes further than this, though. The inventors of technology tend to be arrogant and without scruples, interested in the intellectual sparring and being the first at an invention, less interested in the consequences for their actions, unless that comes with fame or prestige. You see interactions between famous philosopher scientists within the game series, both the first 2 games actually, and you can see how this develops over time. It culminates in this sort of critique of Enlightenment style philosophy and that whole era of our own history. In contrast with this, we have the Void, a metaphysics to go with the physics, a space between life and death, a nothingness, emptiness at first pass with a mystical hold over the world. But from nothing, some are able to draw power not quite connected to the normal rules of reality. Interestingly, the occult was very present in our version of this era of history, but as far as I'm aware, the gaining of the ability to teleport around was a little rarer. Often the best ways past the technological innovations of the day is the mark of the outsider. After all, the Void is not quite empty. Apart from the flying whales, a creature deeply mystical in the lore, we have a gatekeeper, the outsider. By the way, I think it's no accident that the previously mentioned technology is commonly powered by, if not first constructed to use, whale oil. The mundane draws its fuel from the mystical. And the outsider, the guardian of the Void touched, elusive and unknowable to a degree, he now stands at the edge choosing who should benefit from the powers of the Void. He plays a shadow, one that over the course of the series develops into a character who you're not sure you can trust. Consistently enigmatic and esoteric, he is one of the real interesting touchstones. And if you couldn't tell, Death of the Outsider, the game, is very interested in him and, well, his death. We then have Honor. Frequently we have characters trying to repent or change a decision or failure from the past. These mistakes are different from person to person and only really exist from the suggestion in the title. So the series brings together these ideas of technology, the mystical, along with a sense of honour, a conception of it that comes from not fulfilling one's duties and failure. So, let's set up the main characters in Doto, or Death of the Outsider, along with the teeny tiny bit of judgment. Firstly, we have one of your main companions, your impetus for your quest, and your murder daddy Daud. He's done with moping around after actually suffering consequences for his actions. I mean, he is the character who kicks off the first game by doing the first dishonouring and killing the Empress, the one Corvo was meant to be protecting. He's the main character of the DLC of the first game, and that whole story is kicked off by a hint given to you from the outsider to go after a mysterious character named Delilah. Well, firstly, a mysterious boat named Delilah, but it expands from there. She is the head of the Coven of Witches and the antagonist of the second game. This is her first introduction. So you end up following a series of clues through a variety of missions to find that Delilah plans on transporting her consciousness from her own body into Emily's, the current heiress to the throne. Here, Daud dishonours himself by saving the young unknowing Empress. Throughout this story, Daud presents as this person who has only just realised how rotten and corrupt he is, but this revelation comes far too late and he's only just trying to deal with the consequences. And it's a redemption arc that shows this break in his psyche. He even eventually admits to Corvo that something broke in him when he killed the Empress, although all of that other murdering and killing along the way does not seem to have affected him too greatly. Next we have the black-eyed bastard himself, the Outsider. Initially he is a shadow visited upon you in your moment of need, granting you these esoteric powers. He comes across as aloof and detached, an observer interested in the outcomes of his subjects. When tempted, how would the recipient of his mark act? He serves as this force that asks the protagonist to consider their actions, as well as the player. He is often speaking to both. This is then developed over the course of the second game, both in personality and story. You discover his origins, along with a noticeable change in personality, coming across far more judgmental. This may be down to a change in voice actor, or a clearer way that he's written, but he leaves us more of an imprint both on the story and as a player as time goes on. He often presents himself as an unbiased observer, just interested in the choices people make. But as his choices develop, so does he. By the third game, we get an emotion not really seen before, straight up anger. This all helps personalise a distant character and have him in a position that you inherently cannot trust. His main prerogative for giving out powers is to people that he finds interesting, or he thinks will make interesting decisions. The actual consequences seem to matter little to him. You can see how Daud might, from all of this, conclude that he must kill him, or how he might want to conclude that he needs to kill him. This ends up being one of the more nuanced pieces of writing for me. You can see how someone who's very used to exerting control on his environment and world around him, someone who starts to feel a little guilty about all the horrific things he has done, would maybe want to repent. But instead of accepting his own culpability, he shifts all the blame onto a god who deigned to give him powers. We can all agree that around 93% of all superhero fiction is of course dealing with the ramifications of powers in the mundane world, but the lesson seems to be rarely that gaining powers gives you carte blanche to be a dick. But without the power of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Daud has to figure this out for himself. Daud concluding to kill the Outsider is actually the end of the first mission of Death of the Outsider. But firstly, let's talk about our protagonist, Billy Lurk, another character with a dishonouring. Her particular brand stems from her loyalty to Daud. You see, proximity to Daud and his Outsider's mark gave a group of assassins his abilities. Well, during the DLC from the first game, Billy betrays Daud to Delilah. Trust seems as easy to come by as one who would betray it. In the canon of the game, she is spared and goes to live a life away from Dunwall. Helping the protagonist of two, Emily or Corvo, she ferries them around on their quest to stop Delilah, out of what seems to be a similar guilt that is afflicting Daud. She cannot get away from that life. Daud and Billy are central to the stories of the series, but their canon is more fully explored off to the side somewhat. And canon is a really important word to consider here. Choices, as a rule, have outcomes. These are specifically designed by the creators of Dishonored, and are also systematised in the Chaos system. A lot of what we are talking about here is directly affected by this system. Choices have consequences. From the moment to moment of whether to stab or strangle a guard, with the lethal option being quicker, but also generally frowned upon. Or the larger choices, like how you dispatch your main targets, with the so-called non-lethal tending to be more difficult to complete. At the end of each level you are judged on your actions and the narrative warps to your choices. It is a subject that I have discussed on the channel quite a while ago, but now having sat with it, I still have some fresh opinions on the subject. Firstly, games reacting to players in both the moment to moment and on a meta level is just cool. It creates a conversation between the player and the game, between the physical and electronic, and is one of the aspects that makes narrative within games so interesting. The part of it I dislike is how concrete the system is and how forward the game puts it. It becomes manipulative and unavoidable instead of just reactionary. These systems could just exist out of your view, for instance, producing reactions that feel organic to the player. Instead, it serves as this daily reminder of your evil, and it's given to you at the end of each mission. I want to make choices that are hard, that you have to really consider, not because it falls on one side of a moral binary that I know exists ahead of time. It leads to decisions being made for me to some degree. So we have our characters, Daud and Billy, with their mission to kill the Outsider, a story of the supporting roles of the previous games. The main story goes through a series of beats that involve finding items and clues to what and where the Outsider is and how we can kill him. We have to piece together several disparate elements to gain an idea of what's going on. Interestingly, on the mechanical front, the game feels mostly iterative on first pass, but as you familiarise yourself with the systems, it is actually a drastic move away from the rest of the games. The regular stealth action is here, with exploration and experimentation being key tenets. After all, when you fully explore a level, more opportunities expose themselves to you, ones that might be preferable to just running into direct combat, although you'll find Billy is pretty adept in this regard also. In fact, what is missing might be most poignant here. It's the moral judgment, the Chaos system. Removing these shackles means that if all hell does break loose, that I'm less likely to instant reload, worried about how the game is going to judge me. I was much more likely to play out fights with the full kit. Even though there are actually less explicit choices here, I felt free to make the ones that are here myself. Who to kill and leave alive was down to me and my agency, only with a bit of narrative influence. As always, the Void is here for Billy also. The Outsider, in a fit of rage, marks you in a far more destructive way than he does most people. He knows your mission after all. Instead of a tattoo on the back of your hand, he replaces your entire arm and your eye with pieces of the Void. But this provides a set of familiar Void-based abilities. I love the fact that each character who's touched by the Void has abilities unique to themselves. They really come through strongly as who they are, an expression of themselves, a different point of inflection on the same concepts. Corvo had Blink, the ability to move from point to point, teleporting where he needs to go, away into and out of tricky situations. Daud also had his Blink ability, but if he stops moving, time stops moving, so he can more easily pick where he wants to blink to, suggesting this higher level of mastery. Emily instead has Far Reach, an animalistic ability to pull herself forward to a location, with the upside of bringing objects and enemies in also, adding this layer of desperate force to her actions. And then Billy has Displace. You see, Billy's all about planning. Systematically and narratively, this is what she did for Daud as his right-hand man, while Displace lets you set up a location to blink to, go do something away from it and then snap back to that position. So you could say set up your Displace location, get into combat, fight an entire fight, and then, when it's getting a bit too hairy, just disappear again. This fits in with her Farsight ability also. This allows you to freeze time and move through the level freely as an apparition, making a mental note of useful items or people to avoid. You can also use this to put down a Displace orb, meaning you can think ahead to use it down the line, so you can enact a plan with the execution of an assassin. This compounds with changes to the Magicka system. These changes I was not even aware that I wanted, before they were implemented. Now you have a set amount that you can use, providing limits as before, but then instead of having to manually drink something to fill it up, it recharges, essentially allowing for these short bursts of magical action, by the end of which your opponents will hopefully be dead. Again, this is fitting for the character, planning out your moves and then enacting them all within a short period of time before disappearing. So if we combine the removal of this chaos system, along with these bursts of power that your character has, we actually developer narrative in the game. I honestly suspect that this is due to scope limitations on the game, it being more of a DLC / expand alone type deal. But it does also get to this regression in Billy's character. You see, she spends the second game striving to absolve herself from participating in the death of the Empress, but along with this, she also ends up betraying Daud, and both of these things she regrets. These motivations lead her to fully agree with the mission statement of the game, and to justify it by any means necessary, and that is taking down the Outsider. Hence the removal of the Chaos system, which actually means the game kind of agrees with her mission statement. It's no longer judgmental in the matter. You can murder your way through practically the whole thing with little to no consequences. Well, that's what I thought until I did a little more research after finishing the game. There are these chaotic consequences, a slight increase in guards and such. They are hidden and so small that it's almost unnoticeable. Previously I've argued that the Chaos system and my issue with it is down to the fact that it judges you, but it's telling you it judges you, thusly becoming manipulative in the process. It's always been in my mind a much better system for it to judge you and not tell you it's judging you. As you might imagine, taking down the Outsider is no easy matter. Mortal weapons will not be sufficient, and up to this stage no one you know has visited the Void off their own volition. We need a way in that's not being dragged in by the Outsider. So, to start off our path to kill the Outsider, we need to actually gain our mission, which brings us to Karnaca, a place that strikes me as having the exact same society as Dunwall, just a little bit warmer. In my head I always had it down as being this colonial territory, with Dunwall being coded as the UK. But on closer inspection of some wikis, that does not appear to be the case. It's probably more in line with an empire. Not that those two things are completely detached from each other. We have to take down this gang that's using void powers to create an underground fighting ring, in which we find their lead fighter. Happens to be Daud. This is the point where he notifies us of his all-important quest to kill the Outsider. This first mission serves as a lovely introduction to the mechanics, and more importantly the level design. The boxing ring serves as this area that has sections open to the general public but spaces that are closed to the public, as well as secret pathways between the two, all cleverly hidden within the architecture of the level. This means you have places with friction, as well as opportunities that present themselves. A combination of these things means that you want to get through the places with heavy friction, with all the guards and such, using exploration, as you will be rewarded for knowing the level well. One of the few new mechanics in the game are these optional contracts that can be taken on each level. It's a way to keep your coin purse topped up, but it's also a great tool for the developer to nudge play in certain directions by imposing a task on you with limitations. So for instance, one of them is throwing a certain character off a bridge to make it look like suicide. Normally you'd avoid walking through public areas with a character dead or unconscious on your shoulder. Also, the place where you find him is surrounded by 3 people, meaning that you have to find a way to get rid of those first. It puts you out of the normal style of play. You see, with stealth games it can often be a path of least resistance, or a playstyle that has these set of best practices, that mean by the end of the game levels can become rote. You understand how to overcome most of the situations. Whereas offering a motivation for players to break this best practice style approach allows you to subvert a player's normal interactions with the game and develop it. So, the clue from this level is a tattoo that the gang wear. Unique, it provides a lead to chase down on the streets of Karnaca. This produces the best level of this game, and it's one that you actually return to. It's a sort of high bar for the series, in fact. There are some quest markers pushing you in certain directions, but is much more open than later levels. You quickly learn to be looking in places outside of your eye line, and in general this is mostly an open level. From a series perspective it's not completely unique, but it joins some of the high bar previously set. Next we have the bank robbery. Now I love a bank robbery. They are often high points in immersive sims such as this. They have a complicated series of security, they have spaces open to the general public, as well as areas off limits. Other people are going to be storing things there apart from the void blade that we need, meaning you get to crack into their wealth. They bring together so many aspects of the genre that often mean they shine out. But that is not the case for me this time round. Some of what I've said is true, but we are faced with a linear path through a level that only has one new aspect: microphones. And with that, honestly, just answer the right answer and you win. You're through. hardly putting up any resistance whatsoever. Instead of giving you a play space for you to explore and figure out, you are given what is essentially a linear path with obstacles. Now these obstacles do allow you to get around it in your own way, but it's fairly straightforward. It's also worth noting there are a couple of ways of approaching the bank itself. You can go from the roof, from the front door, or from underground, and you can also knock out all the guards with this poppy tincture. But when compared to the choices in Hitman 2, the bank level there, or Deus Ex, they are lacking. With these types of game, choice makes up an essential component of agency. So when you limit the choice, you limit the agency. Interestingly, this linearity continues for the rest of the game now, which is especially noteworthy as the next mission takes place somewhere where we have been before in the series, the Royal Conservatory. Looking back to our first visit in Dishonored 2, we have a level that came in 2 stages, the streets and then the conservatory. The streets provide a place to gather information and to learn about your target, exploration rewarded with information and upgrades. From here we get into the large conservatory building, reminiscent of 19th century British buildings. It is large and with multiple floors. I mean, you can get where you need to go very quickly, but there is plenty to explore. Also, due to its verticality, you get this sense of working your way through the building, putting together the pieces of how it's constructed, and really exploring the place. When I found out the next level was the Royal Conservatory, I really look forward to coming back. Coming back to the same level is a great trick between games, especially if enough time has passed that there can be changes. You get that nostalgia feeling, but you're also interested to explore, not just for the traditional rewards, but to see what's different from last time. But then the level falls into these similar issues that we talked about with the bank level. The streets are just cut very short, then the conservatory itself has been blocked off as it's under investigation. It did have this slight witch infestation. This means that there is an active crime scene being investigated. And the aesthetic for this is really cool, but the way it actually operates in terms of level is that everywhere is blocked off into these separate sections, which makes sense for a crime scene. You want to be able to go through methodically. But this also has been done in such a way that you basically have one linear run for the critical path. You can't cut out whole sections like you could previously, just jump in between the levels. And then we lastly come to the final level, the quarry. This is after finding in the conservatory that this is a area that's very close to the void in the physical realm. Well, we have to work our way to this tear in the void, a place to invade and find the outsider. But again, we're going through a level with this straight shot through. If we reference some of the older levels in the series, like the Boyle Manor from the first game, that level has these heavily guarded streets that you're free to explore, where you can see the poor of Dunwall being policed brutally, forced to stay inside during a curfew. A few of the buildings are locked down with plague spread through, and then this is contrasted to this central building area where the grossly rich are having this Jane Austen style party, which you are free to explore as well. The differences between the two are sharp, but beyond this, the Boyle Manor, it feels living and breathing. None of this comes out in most of Death of the Outsider. So, this brings us to the end, the titular Death of the Outsider. We get an option for a non-lethal takedown, or we can just kill him. Either way, the Guardian of the Void is gone, meaning he loses control of who gets the power. Void is unleashed, unguided by any rational being, potentially leaving the world more chaotic than before. Ethically, this is likely to leave unintended consequences, but maybe the uncontrolled manner of the situation is preferable to forfeiting all this potential power to one person. Death of the Outsider's story operates tying up many loose ends of the series. Dowd, Billy and the Outsider all find their final conclusion. We also get what ends up being the most interesting iteration on powers, a gaming conversation with previous decisions and one that does not necessarily shout louder, instead complicating the discussion with small but impactful changes. An exploration of the metaphysics of the world that has enough to more than just snack on. The levels themselves are lacking. They are fine to move through, but on closer inspection they just do not have the depth of the rest of the series. Ideas are developed to a much greater degree when you have these open spaces compared to just linear runs of levels. The strongest parts of the game are the changes to the chaos and the powers, but the locations themselves only really provide a place to explore it, and nothing more. That's all to say that Dishonored remains one of my favourite series I have played. Each time I come back to it, my perspective changes and deepens. Often when I revisit media, I have one of two reactions. Reaction 1, either a reflection on how stupid younger me was, how on earth did I ever think that this thing was good? Or reaction 2, how stupid younger me was, I have missed whole aspects of this thing that just completely glossed over and not really understood what's going on. and we are sitting with a game that appears in that second category. And I gladly say I look forward to playing it again in another decade and reflect on how stupid that me writing this is. Even with some of the weaker elements, Death of the Outsider is a worthy conclusion to the series. The narrative really does pull it through. I would love to spend some more time in this world one day. So lastly, let's talk about the channel. I know there's been a distinct lack of videos recently, and while it's just really hard to get anything made, I'm hoping to have made some changes to my life which should change this, but it may still be a slow pace. I like to spend my time on getting things right in the way I like, and even then I look at this video and go, oh, I would change this, I would change that. But similar as the statement as they say when it comes to video games, I don't think these sorts of projects are ever finished, they're just abandoned. That's to say, I'm going to put all of my old videos that's not a Let's Play into a separate folder, or playlist, called Old Videos, and the rest is either going to belong in a critique series like this, and another series potentially up and coming, but that's a work in progress very much. So, that's all to say. If you've enjoyed this, then please like it. Comment any thoughts, I will respond to it. I enjoy seeing what people think of my videos. And drop a subscribe to support me. My name's been Billy. Goodbye.